Hello everyone. Okay, this is part 2 of the instructional videos to help you do this project that I'm going to ask you to do later, where we're going to search for any bias between the 3 different types of measurements of inflation that we have. So you might remember that we collected this data in the instructional video number 1. So this is the Consumer Price Index, Producer Price Index, and GDP deflator going all the way back to 1950. And the first thing we want to do is we need to adjust them in such a way that they all start at the same point so that we can have that graph that you saw in the other video where they all start together and we can search for a bias. So the way I thought I would do that is make a little space here to sort of break them up, and then we'll take these titles and just paste them over here. And the years, of course, they'll stay the same, so I'll just bring those down. Probably don't even need them. All right, now, what I want to do is I want to get the CPI, the Producer Price Index, and the GDP deflator to all start together. So why don't we all just let them start with the number 100? So the best way to do that is to take the Consumer Price Index. Whoa, let's get all the way, hold on a minute. Sorry, my fault. This spreadsheet was copied from one on the internet, and it's got this weird feature that I don't normally use. So we're going to copy this thing, make sure we start up here in 1950, and paste it. Now I'm good. Okay, so we want to reset the CPI to be 100 in the year 1950. And the easiest way to do that is to grab the number, right, that it is in 1950, then divide by that actual number. So I'm going to key it in, 24.1. So that division is going to make 1. And then I'm going to multiply the whole mess by 100. So now the Consumer Price Index for 1950 is 100. And if you look at how this works, when you just copy them down, you can see, in fact, you can check with your calculator that the percentage changes that's occurring in these numbers here is exactly the same as the percentage changes that you see over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that all the way down. So what you have there is the CPI as if it had started at 100 way back in 1950. By the way, that's an awful lot of digits, so if you don't mind, I'm going to reset the number of digits to just one digit past the decimal point, and it'll look a lot more reasonable. Now the Producer Price Index, we would do the same way. You might stop this instructional video and see if you can do it. But the way you would do it is you would say a formula is coming. You would grab the first one. Then you would divide by that actual number by keying it in, 27.3. So it would be the same all the time. And multiply that result by 100. And that should do it. And the same for the GDP deflator. You grab the number, right? Then you divide by the actual number by keying it in, 13.738. And then you multiply the whole mess by 100. Okay, so now we've got the Producer Price Index and the GDP deflator both starting at 100, and I want to copy them down. And they should be, yeah, similar, but not quite the same, and that's exactly what's happened. Let me clean it up a little bit by getting rid of a lot of those extraneous digits that are sitting out there. There we go. So now what we have is we have a CPI, Producer Price Index, and GDP deflator that all began at the number 100 and then marched forward depending on how they were measured. Now check this out. If we grab this thing and make a quick graph, so I'm going to do that with this line graph, which I don't normally use, but just make a quick graph so I can see. And now I have to find it wherever it went. There it is right there. You can see that they don't lay on top of each other. There's serious deviation here. And in fact, the numbers are sometimes tricky. If you see down here where it looks like they really do lay on top of each other, chances are they probably don't. It's probably because of scaling that it looks like that. In other words, there's difference can show here because the numbers are quite large, but the numbers are small over here, and so they're crowded on this linear scaling. To put it another way, if I did the same analysis, so let's get rid of this one, and now this time, instead of going from 1950 all the way to the present, I'm just going to go, say, from 1950 to 1970. Just going to do these. You'll see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to find that line graph. And now you can see that they do deviate. The producer price index is rising the slowest. The GDP deflator is rising the fastest, at least in those early years. And the consumer price index was in the middle. But I haven't done this, but I'm going to make a bet right here in this lesson that if we do that same kind of study for more recent years, it'll look different. So just remember, this says the producer price index is rising the slowest, the consumer price index is rising second, and the GDP deflator is rising the fastest. All right, so let's get rid of that. And then let's do, I wonder if I can do it this way. Let's see if I can crowd those things out of here. And let's just get since the year 2000. See if it'll let me do that. So I'm going to grab these numbers. No, it won't let me. Oh yeah, I can't easily do this because I haven't recentered them. I'll ask you to do it. But I'll bet you that it'll turn out that the consumer price index, let's just see what this looks like. Yeah, so see, they didn't start together. And so it's really hard to tell. We would have to re-manipulate the money, the indexes, to get them all to start together to see what's really going on. But this is just a quick check of how you would do it. Now I want to show you a more formal way. So again, I'm going to do this thing, but this time I'm going to use a different graphing feature. Actually, I don't need to highlight anything. I want to come over here to Insert. Now instead of using the line graph, what I want to use is a scatter plot, which is the one I most often use. And then we'll use this line graph so it'll look like the other one. Now the beauty of using a scatter plot is that Bill Gates doesn't try to guess ahead of you on what you want on the x-axis and what you want on the right axis. So what I've done is I've right-clicked inside of this graph here, and now I want to select my data, and I'm going to add 3 series. The first one I'm going to call the Consumer Price Index, and now the x values are going to be the years, 1950 to 2013, and the y values are going to be the CPI. Well, what happened? The y values, I messed up a little bit. Let's get this thing to come up here. The y values are going to be the CPI. And let's just see if that actually worked. I'm a little nervous about it. See what we got. Where's our graph? There. Yeah, that's exactly what we want. So that's the Consumer Price Index, how it looks from 1950 to 2013. Now if I right click in here, I can select more data. And this time I'm going to add the Producer Price Index. And my x-axis is going to be, again, the years. So I start with 1950 all the way down to 2013. And my y values, let's get this thing back up there so I can get the Producer Price Index for 1950 all the way down to 2013. Okay, that. And let's see how that looks. There. So now you can see, and this graph is better than the one we did before because now you actually have the years down here on the x-axis, and it makes a lot more sense. And while I have you here, I'm going to go ahead and do the graph for the GDP deflator. The way I would do that is just right-click in here, select data. Now I'm going to add the GDP deflator. And the x values, of course, are the years again. And the y values are the GDP deflator. I got to make sure I start at the top. There it is. That should do it. Let's OK that thing. Let's see what we have. Yeah, there they are. If you want, I think I can get this to show up in a different tab if I can remember how to do that. Move chart. I think I'll move it to a new sheet. Now it'll be plenty big. There. Let me move my image out of the way for a little bit so you can see this thing a little better. So this is what we have. So they started together because I forced them to start together in 1950, and this is how they deviated. Now I hope this graph will impress upon you the point I tried to make last week, that the three measures of inflation, they have biases in them. And the weird thing is, like, it looks like the producer price index was underestimating inflation, at least as estimated by the others, for, God, it looks like 20 years. And then something happened in the mid-70s, and suddenly it began to measure inflation much faster than the others. See how it caught up so quickly? And then it sort of went back to its old ways. It's kind of weird. And in fact, what I'm thinking about doing for the first test is having each of you do something like this, and I'm going to give you different years. So I might get you to do an analysis from 1950 to 1960, somebody else to do 1960 to 1970, and somebody else to do 1970 to 1980, and so forth. And I think we'll be most surprised in what we find. That in some of those decades, maybe the CPI will rise the fastest, and in other decades, maybe the producer price index, and so forth. So let's see if I can get back to my data. Where did it go? There it is. So here's my data. Now, one last thing before I turn off this video. What we've done, go back to the chart for a second. What we've done is we've just plotted out the index itself. But what if you plotted out the rate of change? That is, what if you plotted out the inflation rate is actually measured by each of these things? So we can do that over here. I'll create another little thing. We'll call this so now we're going to measure the inflation as measured by, right? Inflation is measured by each of these things. See if that works. Yeah. And I need my years. Should have copied that one over. Maybe I can just copy it like this. Grab all these things. Okay. Copy that. See if I can just paste that right there. Oh, yeah. So let's see. Yeah, there's my years. Okay. And I don't know why this thing is in our way, but the years are under there. Wish I could make that thing go away, but I don't know how. All right, so now we want to calculate the inflation rate. So if you think about it, the inflation rate for 1950 we can't figure because we don't have the number for 1949. But we can figure the inflation rate for 1951. The inflation rate for 1951 is the difference in the index from 1951 and 1950 divided by the index in 1950, and the whole thing times 100 to put it in percent. So I can figure the inflation rate for 1951 as follows. Parentheses is the difference in the CPI in 1951 minus the CPI in 1950. Okay, take that difference and divide that difference by the CPI in 1950, and then multiply the whole mess by 100. So the inflation rate in 1951, according to this, was 7.88%. And I'm going to clean this up because I think, one digit past the decimal point is probably enough. There we go, 7.9%. Now that's the formula, and it's really kind of obvious since luckily we were at 100 in 1950 and now 107.9, so it should be 7.9%. We can do the same thing for these other two. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, it should have been 11.4, and that's what we show, and this should be 7.1. Now we can copy them all down. So these are the inflation rates as measured by the CPI, producer price index, and GDP deflator. Now I wonder what they would look like if we put them in that graph. And it should look a little bit like that graph that I had in the other lesson. Let's just see. And I won't use a scatter plot because it'll take me a while to do that. This will just give us a rough idea. So we'll go back to the line graph. And I guess it did it. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, there. See how they dance together? But there are really huge differences. So this graph is hard to interpret other than to see that they kind of move together. But the biases are much easier to see when you let them accumulate from year to year. So it's really quite interesting. Like, look at here. The producer price index really showed a lot of inflation in whatever year that was. Since this is a line graph, it doesn't give us the year. But if you did it more carefully with a XY plot, you could see. And then over here, the producer price index, showed hardly any, in fact, negative inflation, and the others were positive. So they're really showing lots of different things. Okay, so bring my image back over here. Hope you found this lesson useful. You really need to practice because I am going to ask on the first test for each of you to reproduce a small portion of this thing. And you have my data to check your work against, but I won't give you my original Excel spreadsheets. You'll have to create those on your own. Okay, good luck.